Jungkook defends Taehyung against senior reporter's attack on his past, but the revealed truth shakes the entertainment world. When Taehyung was insulted at a press conference, Jungkook stepped up to defend him. But who would have thought that his actions would open a media vendetta scandal that would rock the K-pop world? Taehyung, tell us, how does it feel to be an actor now, when not too long ago you were just a trainee with a reputation of being handsome but lazy? A lot of people say you're just eye candy, no real talent. The room froze. The question, sharp and venomous, sliced through the air like a blade. The senior reporter who had thrown the question sat back, his smile thin, almost cruel. The bright spotlights flickered, casting harsh shadows on his face as if the camera itself was waiting for the reaction. Taehyung's face tightened, his smile strained like a mask slipping off. For a split second, the world stopped moving. The clock ticked audibly. His breath caught in his throat. Taehyung tried to keep his composure, but behind that polite smile, his eyes told a different story. A story of years of insecurity, of silent battles fought in the darkness of practice rooms, of late nights wondering if anyone saw beyond the surface of his face. Then enough. Jungkook's voice cut through the tension, as sharp as the reporter's barb. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood, and in one fluid motion, grabbed the microphone. His gaze locked on the reporter with a calm fury. A question like that isn't just unprofessional, it's disrespectful. You're here to ask about his work, not to throw insults under the guise of journalism. The room fell silent. The cameras clicked, the lenses zooming in, capturing every fraction of movement. Jungkook didn't back down, his presence radiating confidence and unspoken authority. The senior reporter's smile faltered. He looked momentarily rattled, but quickly regained his composure. He laughed, a thin, mocking sound, but did not dare say another word. Taehyung remained still, his gaze lowered, hiding the brief flash of gratitude in his eyes. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was something else beneath the anger that churned inside him. Relief. For once, someone had stood up for him. As the event ended and the cameras finally turned off, the tension in the air didn't dissipate. Jungkook and Taehyung shared a quiet glance before they both walked backstage. Taehyung felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest, though he still didn't fully understand why. Later, as they sat together in the car, the weight of the day settled on them. Taehyung, who had spent so many years carrying his insecurities like a heavy cloak, now felt a strange lightness. Jungkook, ever the silent protector, spoke up first. "Don't let them get to you, Taehyung. You work hard for this." Taehyung gave him a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to stand up for me." Jungkook shrugged, his eyes gazing out the window as the city lights blurred past. "I'm your friend, aren't I? I'll always have your back." It was more than just a promise. It was a statement of trust, something Taehyung had been too afraid to believe in for so long. But there was something else lurking under his calm exterior. A question, a quiet thought that had been growing louder the more he reflected on what had just transpired. Days passed, but the aftershocks of the conference didn't fade. The incident went viral, and the backlash against the senior reporter was swift. People were enraged, not just at the question, but at the blatant disregard for professionalism. Fans, media outlets, and even other idols began speaking out against the reporter's behavior. But the most shocking discovery came when an independent journalist, digging into the history of the incident, uncovered something more troubling. A few days after the conference, a file surfaced. It was an email from 6 years ago. Taehyung's name was clearly visible, along with a note from the reporter, Han Jinwoo. The message was part of a larger thread between him and the HYB management team, discussing an exclusive interview. Taehyung's reply, dated from back then, was simple: "I won't participate. Your questions are too personal." It wasn't just a refusal. It was a rejection of the type of journalism that made the man famous, sensationalism, and making idols the target of personal attacks. Han Jinwoo's grudge, buried deep, had festered for years. Now, it seemed, he had found his moment to strike back. And the question? It wasn't an innocent inquiry. It was a deliberate stab at someone he'd long held a personal vendetta against. The revelation exploded across social media, and suddenly, the narrative shifted. Anjinu's reputation crumbled. His past practices of bullying young idols during interviews began to surface, with several others coming forward to share their stories of uncomfortable and personal questions. But the most shocking part of the discovery wasn't just the reporter's long-held grudge. It was the hidden history of how deep the rot ran within the industry itself. Taehyung didn't know how to process it all. He had spent years burying the past, refusing to acknowledge the darker parts of his journey as an idol. But now, with Jungkook standing firmly by his side, he began to understand something more profound. Jungkook had always been the one who had helped him when he was lost in doubt. Now, he was teaching him something even more important. Sometimes, standing up for yourself meant letting someone else fight beside you. That night, Taehyung sat alone in his room, his phone glowing with notifications from fans, colleagues, and even other idols offering their support. But it wasn't the praise that caught his attention. It was a single, anonymous message that arrived in his inbox, the words sending a chill down his spine. Do you remember 2018? The incident with the practice room sabotage? If you do, know that this isn't over. Jinwoo wasn't the only one involved. His fingers trembled as he stared at the message. His heart skipped a beat. What was this about? What had happened all those years ago that he had been too afraid to ask? The screen faded to black. The morning after the chaos of the press conference, Taehyung couldn't shake the sense of unease that lingered in the pit of his stomach. Despite the support from Jungkook and the outpouring of positive messages from fans, something gnawed at him. A quiet, persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. It was the email. The anonymous message he had received late last night. You remember 2018? The incident with the practice room sabotage? If you do, know that this isn't over. Jinwoo wasn't the only one involved. What incident? He couldn't remember anything about a sabotage. His heart pounded as he stared at the message again. Every word like a clue to a mystery he didn't even know he was part of. The more he thought about it, the more elusive it became, the more his mind screamed for answers. But how could he confront this? He'd buried everything from those early trainee years, the sleepless nights, the pressure, the overwhelming doubts. But this felt different. This wasn't just a ghost from the past. This was someone or something someone was trying to bring back to life. As he sat on the edge of his bed, his thoughts spiraling, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He stood up quickly, wiping his palms on his jeans. The last thing he expected was Jungkook, stepping into the room with a quiet urgency in his eyes. You okay? Jungkook's voice was soft, like a reassurance Taehyung didn't even realize he needed. But his eyes were sharp, as if he was already anticipating something Taehyung hadn't yet said. Taehyung smiled faintly, his fingers still gripping the phone tightly. I don't know, man. There's something off about all of this. I thought I could just ignore it, but that message, it's like a warning. Jungkook took a seat beside him, his presence comforting in a way Taehyung couldn't quite explain. Taehyung, if you want to talk about it, I'm here. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. The sincerity in Jungkook's voice almost made Taehyung want to break down. Instead, he steadied himself, shaking his head. It's probably nothing, just someone messing with me. But why does it feel like it's something bigger? Like there's a part of my past I don't even know about. Jungkook frowned, considering his next words carefully. If there's one thing I know, it's that the past doesn't stay buried forever. It always finds a way of coming back. The following days were a blur. News outlets buzzed with the fallout from the press conference. Han Jinwoo's reputation, once untouchable, was now in tatters. But Taehyung couldn't bring himself to enjoy the victory. The more he watched the coverage, the more he felt that something darker was hiding beneath the surface. That afternoon, Taehyung sat at his desk, flipping through old notebooks from his trainee days, trying to find any clue that might explain the vague recollection of sabotage. His fingers grazed over the yellowed pages, each one filled with routines, vocal exercises, and notes from old managers. But then, one notebook caught his eye, an old diary that had slipped between the pages. He opened it carefully, reading the familiar handwriting. August 2018. The practice room felt different today, the air thick with tension. I can't explain it, but something feels off. Someone's watching. Taehyung's breath hitched. The words were a distant echo of something he had long since tried to forget. He turned the page. September 2018. The sabotage has begun. Things are disappearing. Water bottles, shoes, even our choreography sheets. I don't know who's doing it, but I'm starting to suspect it's someone from the group. They're trying to break us. The page was covered in scribbles, the ink blotting as though the writer had been shaking with anger or fear. Taehyung's heart pounded as he read those words. A sabotage? He had never mentioned this to anyone, not even Jungkook. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Why hadn't he remembered any of this? That evening, Taehyung and Jungkook sat in the studio alone, surrounded by half-empty coffee cups and the hum of overhead lights. The studio, which had always been their safe space, now felt haunted by the past. Taehyung couldn't stop thinking about the sabotage he had read about in his diary. I found something, Taehyung said, his voice low and hesitant. Something I didn't even remember. Back in 2018, there was a sabotage happening in the practice room, but no one ever talked about it. I don't even remember it happening. Jungkook's gaze softened, but his eyes grew sharp with concern. You're sure? Taehyung nodded. It's all in my old notebook. It says that someone was trying to break us, hide our things, mess with our schedules. I don't know who did it, but it feels like it's all tied together. This message, that reporter, I think they're connected. Jungkook leaned back, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. So someone tried to sabotage you guys back then. You think it was Jinwoo? Taehyung frowned, shaking his head slowly. I don't know. It feels bigger than him. It's like there was something we weren't meant to see, something we were all kept in the dark about. Jungkook stared at him for a long moment before speaking, his voice steady but tinged with worry. If it's bigger than Jinwoo, we need to dig deeper. Someone doesn't want you remembering this, Taehyung. And if they're still out there, he trailed off, his words hanging heavy in the air. Taehyung swallowed hard, the weight of the past pressing down on him. He had always believed that time healed wounds, but now it seemed like the wounds had only been buried, waiting to resurface. I'm scared, Jungkook, Taehyung confessed quietly. What if we uncover something we're not ready to face? Jungkook reached across the table, resting his hand on Taehyung's. Then we face it together. You're not alone in this, okay? We'll get to the bottom of it. As they sat there, the door to the studio suddenly swung open. A figure stepped in, silhouetted by the harsh light from the hallway. It was their manager, her expression unreadable. Taehyung, Jungkook, we need to talk, she said, her voice carrying an edge of urgency. Taehyung's heart skipped a beat. About what? There's more to this than you think. I've been hearing things about 2018. Things you need to know. The tension in the air was thick the day after the press conference. Taehyung and Jungkook sat with their manager, who appeared visibly shaken. I couldn't keep this from you any longer, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. There's been talk about what happened in 2018. Something far darker than what you remember. Taehyung's stomach churned. What do you mean? Their manager hesitated before speaking again, the weight of her words hanging in the room. It wasn't just about sabotaging practice rooms. There was a plan to break you down completely. You weren't the only one targeted. And someone close to you, someone from your inner circle, was involved. The words stung more than Taehyung expected. His hands trembled as he tried to process the revelation. Who? Jungkook's expression darkened as he exchanged a glance with Taehyung. It can't be, but it was. The shocking revelation sent them on a mission to dig deeper. The next day, they uncovered a hidden file in the HYBE archives, an encrypted interview transcript from 2018. As they sifted through the pages, it became clear that the sabotage was orchestrated by someone from within their team. The person in question had been feeding the media false stories about Taehyung, manipulating public perception, and pulling the strings behind the scenes. They were using you, Taehyung, Jungkook said, his voice tight with fury. This was all a setup, and they've been doing it for years. The realization hit harder than Taehyung expected. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was systematic. The person who had caused him so much pain wasn't a faceless enemy. It was someone who had once been trusted, someone who had manipulated their way into the group's core to exploit Taehyung's vulnerabilities, Determined to get to the bottom of it, Taehyung and Jungkook pressed forward, unearthing more secrets buried deep within the company. The key to everything was an encrypted file hidden in the archives, detailing a conversation between a former staff member and a senior manager who had orchestrated the leaks. The staff member confessed to deliberately undermining Taehyung, spreading lies to manipulate public opinion and ruin his career. Jungkook's fists clenched in anger. This isn't just personal revenge, it's a power game. Someone wanted to control your image. But the more they learned, the more dangerous it became. The sabotage wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a calculated attempt to destroy not only Taehyung, but the entire group. With each revelation, Taehyung's sense of betrayal grew. The person who had been feeding false information to the press, orchestrating smear campaigns, and even sabotaging practice sessions was now revealed to be someone who had been in the inner circle all along. Taehyung and Jungkook stood at a crossroads. The evidence they had was damning, but exposing it would come with a cost. The person behind it all was still in the shadows, manipulating the industry from afar. The question was no longer whether they could prove it, but whether they could live with the fallout. "We need to expose them," Jungkook said with conviction, his eyes hard with determination. "If we don't, this will keep happening. Not just to you, but to others. We can't let this person destroy everything." Taehyung stared at the files before him, his heart pounding. The stakes had never been higher. Betrayal, manipulation, sabotage, all of it had been used against him. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about him. It was about standing up for the truth, for his dignity, and for every artist who had been silenced by the same forces. The battle was only beginning as the days passed. The pressure mounted. They had the evidence, but exposing it would not only risk their careers, it would force them to confront a past Taehyung had buried. Yet, with Jungkook at his side, unwavering in his support, Taehyung knew there was no turning back. With every piece of the puzzle that fell into place, the truth became more undeniable. Taehyung wasn't just a victim of a personal vendetta. He had been caught in a web of power, manipulation, and betrayal. But now, armed with the truth, he was ready to take control of his own story, and no one would silence him again. The darkness of his past had surfaced, but it was time to bring it into the light. With the evidence in their hands, Taehyung and Jungkook knew they were close to exposing the truth. The investigation had led them to a former senior manager, a shadow figure who had manipulated Taehyung and many others. But their every move was being sabotaged. Threats, disinformation, and attempts to discredit them from the media made every step forward feel like a battle. Despite the mounting pressure, Taehyung found strength in Jungkook's unwavering support. "We can't stop now," Jungkook said, determination in his eyes. "This is about more than just us. We have to show them the truth." The closer they got to the truth, the clearer it became. This was a game of power. The senior manager, with his deep ties in the industry, had orchestrated everything, but they couldn't stop until they faced him. The moment arrived when they finally confronted the senior manager. In a tense exchange, Taehyung demanded answers. The manager, defensive and arrogant, tried to justify his actions. "You don't understand, Taehyung. Everything I did was for the greater good of the industry. You were a pawn in my game," he sneered. Taehyung's voice was steady. "I'm not a pawn anymore," he said, his eyes burning with newfound strength. With Jungkook standing by him, they exposed the full scale of the manager's manipulation, how he had sabotaged their careers, spread false stories, and controlled the narrative. The truth was out, and it sent shockwaves through the industry. The aftermath of the truth's revelation was seismic. The manager's reputation crumbled as the media turned on him, and artists who had suffered under his manipulation began speaking out. Fans flooded social media with messages of support for Taehyung, while the industry began facing its long overdue reckoning. But even as the truth came to light, the damage was not easily undone. Taehyung's career was in limbo, and his personal life had been upended. The public scrutiny, though much more positive than before, left scars. He was no longer the figure he once was. He was different, stronger, but scarred. Jungkook, ever the constant, stood by him through all. "We've fought for this, Taehyung," It's your time to rebuild. We'll do it together. With Jungkook's support, Taehyung began the slow process of reclaiming his career. The industry had changed, but so had he. No longer willing to be a passive participant, Taehyung stood tall before the press, his voice clear. "This is just the beginning," he declared. "I'm not here to be anyone's pawn. I'm here to be myself." It was a declaration of freedom, a statement that he was no longer bound by the narratives written for him. The truth had set him freed. As the final episode unfolded, the industry had transformed. The toxic culture that once thrived in the shadows was no longer allowed to exist in the light. Taehyung, with Jungkook by his side, had emerged victorious. Their bond had been tested, but it was stronger than ever. Taehyung no longer feared his past. He had faced it head-on and emerged from it stronger. Now, standing before the world, Taehyung knew that his past had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. He had reclaimed his story, his dignity, and his future. The final shot showed Taehyung on stage, looking out over a crowd of loyal fans, a sense of peace settling over him. The shadows of his past were behind him. The future was his to shape.